Hi, this is Kat Roskovics. I'm a senior partner here at Fourlane, and I am going to be your host for this week's Deep Dive QuickBooks Enterprise webinar. And we are going to be talking about job costing. So a little bit about Fourlane. So what we're going to be covering today is looking at job costing. Just to give everyone a little bit of background, we are going to be looking at the preferences that we have set up and some recommendations. Then we're going to be looking at those job cost reports, how we can customize them, and also how we can memorize them for quick access going forward. All right, so I've just got a sample company file open here, and I chose this file because it already has some of the data that we need to kind of display on those reports. Some of the numbers may definitely look a little bit out of whack because it is absolutely a sample file, but it will give us kind of a good look and dive into some of the job cost reports that we want to cover today. So first off, we're going to look at our preferences. So in QuickBooks, we're going to go over to our company preferences, and we are going to look at jobs and estimates. Now, most often when I have a client that needs to do some job cost reporting, whether they're in the construction industry, maybe they do some engineering or architecture. I've had some of those clients in the past. I've also utilized this for nonprofits that need to track grants, and I think we have another video on that on our YouTube channel. We may also use job costs for tracking costs that relate to specific projects, right? Instead of having those different projects broken out on our profit and loss or having to run filtered various transaction detail reports to really get into that information, we can use job costing for those purposes as well. So most often we're going to be definitely creating an estimate. Now we can also change some of our job statuses, which just kind of gives us another way to filter some of our reports. Most of the clients that I have that are using job costing are doing progress invoicing. Now, if we have shorter term jobs, that may be something that you don't need to have. But again, most of them do have that turned on. We do want to make the selection to don't print items that have zero amount. I strongly recommend that because anytime we have a $0 line in QuickBooks, it does add to the overall transaction or file size, right? Because every single line is getting added to that transaction table, whether it's a zero or not. So we want to potentially check that. If there's some reason that you need to have that turned on, definitely reach out. But that's something that we do recommend. And then, of course, warning about duplicate estimate numbers. We don't want to duplicate any of those. So if we have a modification to an estimate or we need to be able to go back and look up, a customer calls and says, hey, I want to move forward with this quote, and we have multiple ones set up in the system, then we definitely want to have that box checked as well. Now, a couple of other ones that we want to review are time and expenses. So oftentimes clients are tracking payroll through QuickBooks when they're doing job costing, but we do occasionally have clients that may be using an outside payroll provider to do that. We have another webinar that goes over how to get to some kind of stated costs for payroll when we are using an outside payroll provider, if the integration from that payroll provider doesn't push over detailed job cost information in the way that we need it. So you can kind of look for that on our YouTube channel as well. If we're using payroll in QuickBooks, we of course want to set our first day of the week and decide if we're going to mark all time entries as billable or not. The difference here is that if we're kind of invoicing based on estimates versus actuals and progress invoicing and how far we are in the job, we probably don't want to check that box. Versus if we have smaller projects where we're using that estimate to really issue a quote, and then we're going to add different billable expenses to that estimate with a markup, or that invoice rather, with a markup, then we might want to leave that box checked. We have the option to create invoices from a list of time and expenses. We can also select tracking reimbursed expenses as income, meaning instead of them going back to the expense account that they went to, they will be tracked to a separate income account. And then we also have the option to mark all expenses, again, as billable. Oftentimes, if we have some overhead expenses, et cetera, that we're allocating to a particular job, probably want to uncheck that box so that they don't automatically pop up as billable, and that can get a little bit annoying every time we go to create an invoice. We're going to see that expenses billable box pop up, and then also marking time entries as billable, right, if that's not our standard workflow. Sometimes clients will have a default markup percentage or an account that they want that markup to go to. So instead of going to the revenue account that we may have mapped on an item, we want the markup to go to a designated account. So if we have a cost that's $1,000 and our markup is 50%, which would be a great markup, right? And we want that 50% markup to go to a different revenue account than maybe that item is mapped to, this is where you could potentially set that up as well. If we are using payroll through QuickBooks, we definitely want to check these features as well. We want to have job costing, class, and item tracking for paycheck expenses. That will allow us to have those payroll entries flow through to some of our job cost reporting as well. And then if we want to assign a class per the entire paycheck or per earnings item, sometimes we might have employees that are working on a couple of different job types. I have seen, as an example, for construction, clients set up to be commercial and residential, as an example, and they don't have employees that are just on the commercial side or just on the residential side. So we want to be able to track that separately as well. All right, so some other recommendations I have just on the overall setup. If we're looking at our customer list here, a lot of the job cost reports are going to be based on an estimate. So while the profit and loss by job is going to be pulling from revenue numbers that we have posted to that job and costs that we have posted to that job, some of the estimate versus actuals reports, which is really the backbone of some of our job cost reporting, we have to have an estimate for that job. So you can see that this job has probably been completely invoiced, but what I did prior to the webinar is I just went and made sure that this estimate is marked active. When you have a job that's totally finished, you've invoiced it out completely, if you mark that estimate as inactive, then it will drop off of some of our job cost reports. So definitely making sure that that is set as active. Now, in addition to the class side, if we have, residential and commercial, that's definitely an option. On the job itself, if we have class tracking turned on and we are assigning classes as a default to jobs, let me just show this real quick here. So accounting, I have class tracking turned on and I want to automatically assign classes to names. That's going to give me this class drop down. So if I had residential as a class and commercial as a class, every time I reference that job, whether it's on an estimate, an invoice, a job cost, As long as I have it tagged to that job, it is going to default to whatever I have on my class side. I've also set up a custom field over here. They had birthday, type, and anniversary. I just set up one for project manager. Sometimes that can be helpful when you're just looking at a list of jobs, seeing which jobs are, assigned to which project managers can be helpful as well. And then on the job info side, we've got a place to put a description that's in addition to, of course, the job name. And then we can apply certain job types and then that job status. So if you change these in that preference screen we were looking at before, you would see those in this drop-down list. And then we just have some start, projected end dates, actual end dates, the job type list in case you want to modify that. You can, of course, add a new one here. But if you wanted to see, let's see here, customer and vendor profile list, my job types list. So if I wanted to have, like I have commercial, if I wanted to have some subs under there, I could. If I wanted to have residential with some subs under there, I could. So it just gives me a little bit of a different way to organize my job types as well. All right, so let's dig into some of our reports. So I'm going to come over here to my reports area. And first, I'm going to actually make a top icon bar because I prefer to see things that way. So I'm going to come over here to reports and I'm going to go to jobs, time, and mileage. Now, a couple of the ones I'm going to look at first are, of course, my job profitability summary. This just gives me, in a nutshell, what my actual cost has been and what my actual revenue is. Now, this does not take into account what my estimated revenue was. It also doesn't take into account any purchase orders that I might have outstanding on a job, so costs that have not come in yet. This is for posting transactions that have hit our GL, and it's going to give us those difference columns. Now, I can also customize this report and look at my percent difference, right? So I can get to kind of a margin on those jobs as well. So that can be useful. We can see right here, we have a lot of estimated costs for this quality built construction job, but no revenue. So that's probably one we need to look at creating an invoice for to get some revenue going on that job. We're going to go over to this job profitability detail. So this report, I have to pick a specific job that I want to run that on. I'm going to pick this cottage new construction one. And this shows me by item. So another tip that I have when clients are working with job costing, because we have to have items on our estimate in QuickBooks, we want to use those items all the way through. So what that means is when we're invoicing for revenue, right, against that estimate, we want to invoice out those same items that we're using on our estimate so that it shows in that actual revenue versus actual cost. When we're entering any expense transactions that are for a particular job and correlate to one of our items in our items list, we also want to use, and we may just see paychecks in here. I'm going to try to find one that has a bill entry. And if I can't, then I'm just going to pull one up. Let's see here. Here we go. So on this bill, we can see that we have our item, right? This was an expense we had. Either we purchased it from a store with some supplies or some demolition equipment that we needed. We may have also just outsourced this portion to a subcontractor. So if that's the case, then we're going to use that same item, that same line item that cost would be subject to from our estimate. We just can enter our quantity, our cost, and then of course we absolutely want to make sure that we're picking that customer and job. And again, right here, just to reiterate before, if we have a class assigned to that customer job, that is absolutely going to show in our costs as well. Now, if we look at our actual costs in total, right, we do have the option to quick zoom on some of those. So if we wanted to see it by item, we can also collapse rows if we want to. So instead of having, you know, all of those in here, we can collapse those rows down. We can also customize this report. So maybe we don't want to see the paycheck information, but we want to see for specific transaction types. Let's say we wanted to see all the bills that we have related to this job. We can filter for that as well. And that's just using that quick zoom from our cost column. And again, these are just for posting transactions. They do not apply to estimates. They're not any purchase orders that we might have outstanding, similar to what we have on this report as well. Now we're going to get into some reports that actually do utilize that estimate feature. So if I wanted to look at my estimates versus actual summary, this is going to give me my total estimated cost, my total actual cost, so I can see I'm a little over on this job here, what I have for my estimated revenue, and my actual revenue. So looking at these columns, estimated cost is going to be my total from that initial estimate, right? My subtotal, that 138,455. And then if I wanted to look at my actual cost, that is going to be for all posting transactions, right? So bills, paychecks, credit card expenses maybe that you have. That's going to post into this actual cost column, and then I'm going to get to a difference. Now again, if I wanted to see also my percent difference on both of these or just one of these, I can absolutely add that column as well. So we can see that we're 3.6% over on this job. Another thing that's going to populate here is my estimated revenue. So if I look again at that estimate, that estimated revenue is coming from my total column. So cost plus my markup. And then again, actual revenue is going to be any invoices I have that are posted to that job. It could also be any sales transaction. Sometimes we may use a sales receipt to post used inventory to a job as an example. That's going to post in our actual cost. Because we're invoicing out different line items, again, we might not see that impact actual revenue. If you want a little bit more detail on that workflow, please reach out. And then of course our difference and then our total difference here as well. So while we are 3.6% over on our cost for this job, we're also 12% over on our revenue. So still looking pretty good. Let's look at a couple of other ones. So estimates versus actuals detail. So similar to that job profitability detail, when we're looking at this is going to be a report that displays by line item. We can add our percent again if we want to. So if we want to dig into the details of are we hitting our margins for these different, or are we getting to what our cost is, what we have estimated, we can see that as well. If we want to look at any that we are particularly over on to make sure maybe there was a cost that was posted using the incorrect item, or maybe we had a vendor that overbilled us from what they initially had told us the job was going to cost. We can definitely take a look at that. And then, of course, same rules apply. Estimated cost is coming from the estimate. Actual cost is coming from posting transactions. Estimated revenue, and then any actual revenue we're going to have here as well. Now we also have some job reports that do not require us to have an estimate. One of those is the profit and loss by job. So if we're not using estimates, but we're still doing job costing, where we want to be tracking our revenue and our expenses by job, then this is a report that you can use. If we have multiple jobs going for a customer and we want to be able to see all of the jobs totaled up, we can collapse columns, and then we can just see the total that we have from Albert Cruz versus the total that we have from Gary Weisinger over here. And then of course our total, that should tie out to our revenue number. So if it doesn't, then that means we have some revenue recorded that maybe isn't posted to a job. So maybe we have some journal entries or something like that. Somebody hit the wrong account when they were entering a transaction. So some of these reports can also be utilized just for housekeeping before you close your month. You can see what those look like. And then another really cool report that they added a few versions back is the committed costs by job. So this committed costs by job report, we do need to have an estimate in here, but it does display our posting costs, right? So costs that have actually hit our GL, but it also shows us our committed costs. So this could be an outstanding purchase order that we have on this job, and we can see right here, it's an $18,000 purchase order. It looks like we've received part of that in. So if I double click on this here, we can see that that first line was received in, meaning it was moved over to a posting transaction. But we can still see what we have in total outstanding purchase orders for that job. If we're using time tracking through QuickBooks, of course, the paycheck is really when that cost is going to post to a job. So if we're using time tracking through QuickBooks and we want to look at what our unpaid wages are that are relevant to that job, QuickBooks will try to do some estimating behind the scenes based on the payroll items that employee is assigned to, along with the time entries that they've used. We can't really drill down on that report, but we could go and look at a time by job summary to see what time is posted to that job. This is helpful because it's letting us know, hey, if all of the costs come in that we have linked to this job, we're going to be way over, right? We're getting our estimated costs. It's adding up our actual costs, our committed costs, and our unpaid wages. So if all of this stuff posts, right, we are going to be way over. We're going to be $74,000 over on that job, which is pretty significant. So again, we'd want to look at and make sure our posting transactions are going to the right jobs. Somebody's not posting time to the wrong job, all of that fun stuff to see if maybe we need to do a change order on this estimate. Maybe we're working on things that are out of scope, right? Those are all things that you can kind of look at and review on this report. The last thing that I wanted to touch on is some customization. So sometimes we might have our classes set up even by project manager as an example. So one thing that we could look at if we have our classes set up like that is we could change our columns to be by class. This sample file obviously is not set up that way, but this is a really easy way to see really how a particular project manager is doing. So that may be one way to set them up. And then we also can memorize our reports. So of course we have access to the memorized reports list. There's some listed under here that we've covered today. But if there is a particular report that you want to be able to run quickly without having to get to our memorized reports, one of the things that I always recommend doing, and I'm just going to pull up this committed cost by job because it's one of my favorite ones. We're going to come up here, instead of saying memorized, we're going to say view and add it to our icon bar. What that's going to do is it's going to put it right up here, so it's front and center whenever we log into QuickBooks. We can also customize this icon bar. So if we wanted to move that up, so we see it a little bit earlier on in that icon bar, then if we wanted to ever run that report, we can just click on committed cost by job. One thing that I'll recommend is if we're trying to see a job cost report through the end of last month, or any of those other things that we might be filtering on that are specifically date driven, we really want to use one of the relative date drop downs. Otherwise, if we look at that report and we say, okay, we want to run it for June, and we put 6/1 to 6/30 in here, every time we click on that report from here, it's always going to run for June, even if we just really wanted to see it for last month. I would recommend putting last month here. All right, so I hope this session was useful to you and let you know a little bit more about how to customize some of our job cost reports. As always, let us know if there's anything else you'd like to learn in a future webinar. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.